Good evening. Pastor Kurt took my first two pieces here, so my next one was please do not use your cell phone. Make sure they're off. Do not use them any time during the presentations. We'd like to thank Pastor Kurt, the Board of Directors, the ushers from Plymouth Church for hosting this event for the city of Sherrill. We greatly appreciate all you've done to accommodate us. Thank you tonight to the technician, Tony Barbano, who's up in the top there, and we could not have done this project without all the technicians from the church. Special thanks to former city historian Craig Crowell for the very organized archives, and to the new historian Sarah Getman for all your help locating information for these presentations. Thank you to former Sherrill resident Jim Wright for the artifact display. We have two sides up here, which you're welcome to come up and look at after the talks. If you don't get to see the display today, it will be here on several other evenings. Anniversary shirts and sweatshirts are on sale at City Hall. Make sure you check those out. The 100th anniversary cookbook is being sponsored by Friends at the Library. The deadline for submissions of your most delicious recipes is April 30th at the library. This will be the format for the evening and all other evening presentations. We will introduce each speaker who will give their presentation. Please save questions and comments for the end of the evening. Out of respect for the speakers, please hold any conversations or comments until that time. We will have a very short break between speakers. Our first presenter will be talking about the Mansion House, and there is a display table at the rear of the church if you would like to become a member and meet the new director, Kevin Coffey. The Mansion House is offering free tours to Sherrill Kenwood residents through the month of July. Please take advantage of this gem of a museum and see what we have to offer. You'll find it very different from years ago. Gary Onion and I are both docents if you have any questions. Thank you for attending, and we hope to see you at all of the history talks. The next talk will be April 24th on the railroads of Sherrill. Gary.
Thank you, Linda. I would like to present Giles Wayland Smith. He's going to be our first speaker tonight. Giles Wayland Smith is a graduate of Amherst College and Syracuse University, PhD. He was professor of political science at Allegheny College from 1967 until 1999, focusing on Latin America with a broader interest in the process of social change and the roles that ideology and specific political movements have played in that process. Since retiring in 1999, Giles taught as an adjunct professor at Hamilton College for 6 years, offered 2 adult classes as part of the OASIS program in Syracuse, and was a professor on the University of Virginia's Around the World semester at Sea program in 2007. Giles is a direct descendant from the United Community on both sides of his family. His great-great-grandmother, Harriet Noyes Skinner, was a sister of John Humphrey Noyes, the founder of the community, and she was one of his first religious converts. On his father's side, his great-great-grandmother, Laura Burgess Smith, joined the community with her 2 sons in 1851. Giles has been a trustee of Oneida Community Mansion House since 1990, assuming the role of board chairperson from 1999 through 2003, and is acting as interim executive director in 2004. He and his wife Kate live in the Mansion House. I present to you Giles Wayland Smith.
Thank you very much, Gary. Before I begin my talk, I'd like to give a little pitch after welcoming you all here. I'm just absolutely delighted that there are so many people here to help celebrate this centennial event. But I would like to make a little pitch. As a long-term member of the Board of Trustees, I'd like to invite all of you, or at least all of you who have not come to the Mansion House as yet, to come over and take a tour of the Mansion House. We are, after all, a National Historic Landmark. But even more importantly, I hope that many of you, as possible, will become members of OCMH. That's because what we call the Oneida story, I think, really matters. It matters because the Oneida community and the history of this place, the history of Sherrill, really matters. And it matters because both the Oneida community and Sherrill intersect so dramatically with the American narrative writ large. In other words, our history here, right now, in Sherrill, this place, over the past 170 years, shed light not only on who we are as a nation and how we got to where we are, but also on the challenges we face as America tries to navigate its future. And you can help us preserve and disseminate that combined legacy by becoming, and hopefully, active members of Oneida Community Mansion House. But let me get to my talk about the Oneida community and its role in the creation of Sherrill. As I mentioned, I'm delighted to be here as part of this celebration because what we're going to be able to talk about is the role in which the Oneida community was intimately involved in that creation. But it wasn't just the Oneida community, but it was also its corporate successor, Oneida Community Limited, that played such a leading role, such a key role in creating and then shaping the character of Sherrill as the smallest city in New York State. I begin my discussion with a not unreasonable assumption that the city of Sherrill would not even have come into being were it not for the religiously based Oneida community and OCL, Oneida Community Limited, which was created when the original community broke up in 1881. But my more fundamental argument is that right from the beginning, what became Sherrill had a very particular look and feel and texture that was the polar opposite of those 19th century company towns that plagued coal mining Appalachia, steel forging Pittsburgh, and George Pullman's Chicago. Sherrill was, in other words, a kind of model community that actually worked. And what we have here is a picture of that community as it developed in the early part of the 20th century. And at least when viewed from above, from a top-down perspective, I believe that Sherrill was what it became because of the beliefs and practices of the members of the Oneida community over time. Now, every community, of course, has its own history and its own stories that can be told from the bottom up. And Linda Evans gave me one such account, Larry Brown's charming post-World War II reminiscence that he entitled Birth of a City, which not only records major historical events of Sherrill, but also paints very rich pictures of the school teachers and church leaders, the mailmen and soldiers, the business owners and the homeowners who helped to shape the fabric of this city. But my job tonight is to look at the founding and early development of Sherrill that we see here. And that means looking at the Oneida community. Now, who were these people and what were their beliefs and practices? The Oneida community was a religiously based community that was settled in 1848 and was led by its founder, John Humphrey Harris, who we see in the middle of this picture. At its height, the community had roughly 300 members, and it lasted until 1881. At that point, a series of internal and external pressures forced it to dissolve, and they created a joint stock corporation, Oneida Community Limited, which assumed all of the community's businesses and assets. And members of the original Oneida community received shares of stock in that new corporation. Here we see a picture in the upper left of the members socializing in what is present-day Quadrangle. And this is a picture of the community members in, I believe, the early 1870s with John Humphrey Noyes right down at the base. The original community, their members called themselves two things: perfectionists and Bible communists. Unlike Orthodox Christians, the Oneida perfectionists believed that people could become perfect, could become sinless, could become selfless, just as Christ was perfect, was sinless, was selfless. Why? Because in their view, the second coming of Christ was a past event, as we see here, occurring in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Because the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem and the second coming back then ushered in the unfolding kingdom of God in the here and now. But how can human beings become perfect? How is that possible? They argued by becoming what they called Bible communists. That is, people can become sinless, can become perfect, can become selfless only by following the early church, where all property was held in common, according to the book of Acts. And this was not just property in the normal sense of land and instruments of production and money, but personal relationships as well, including monogamous marriage. In other words, in addition to holding all the business assets in common, they believed in a kind of free love arrangement which they called complex marriage, where all adult men and women were married together to each other. Putting all of this together, they believed that human perfection was possible, that the creation of heaven on earth was within our reach. But they took it one very radical step further. They believed it wasn't just possible, it could be rationally planned and brought to concrete reality right here, right now. Now, as you can imagine, these ideas were unorthodox and highly controversial, to say the least. And ultimately, the perfectionist community failed. But during its 33-year existence, it was very successful. Indeed, I think one of the most fascinating features of the Oneida community was that these people were not just religious and social visionaries. They were also very pragmatic New Englanders. They were also Yankee entrepreneurs. They recognized that they had to make money in order to flourish and to show the world that heaven and earth could be merged. And make money they did. They were at the leading edge of the Industrial Revolution itself, and they were equally excellent marketers of all their products. The key to their economic success was their high quality of production of animal traps, spooled silk thread, preserved fruits and vegetables, and toward the end of the community's life, the manufacture of flatware. Now, if we look at those in turn, first of all, traps. One of the members of the community was a man by the name of Sewell Newhouse, shown here in the middle. And he was famous locally because as a blacksmith, as well as a trapper, he had invented a trap that had really taken off. And the community recognized right from the beginning that they couldn't be self-sufficient. They needed to produce things, they needed to make money. So they persuaded Sewell Newhouse to show them how to make traps. And what is remarkable is that within a very short period of time, because they created their own machine tools, and over in what becomes Sherrill, the manufacturer of a building in which they could make those, they moved from a production of roughly 1,000 hand-forged Newhouse traps at the beginning of the community to, by the early 1870s, in that plant with their own machine, the production of roughly 400,000 a year. These people became the largest, most prestigious animal trap manufacturer in the Western Hemisphere. And by the early 20th century, they had become the largest manufacturer of traps in the world. If we turn to silk thread, this became their second major production. They sent a few of the community men and women out to learn the silk thread trade. And they learned very well, very quickly, both how to dye and how to spool these threads. And just as they had in the trap area, they perfected the process in a new factory that was part of the larger factory they built in Sherrill. And so, capitalizing upon the invention of the sewing machine and the revolution that was taking place in the textile trade more generally, this became very quickly the second most important manufacturing enterprise of the community. The next was the preservation of fruits and vegetables. They became very well known for all of their produce, and they became so famous for some of them that leading firms such as SS Purse took a major portion of their production in certain areas, such as asparagus, that they could can under their own label. So this became also a major source of income. Finally, flatware. The community had a branch community in Wallingford, Connecticut, which was in that Connecticut River basin that became so famous for the production of silverware more generally. And even though the community's early efforts at making spoons and other pieces of flatware was very primitive, certainly in comparison with the other established manufacturers, it was a business that at least began and it was successful enough so that at the time of the breakup in 1881, they transferred this operation to Niagara Falls. These then, that I've just showed you, were the products that secured the community's future and then made the creation of Sherrill possible because of the success that they had had. But there were two additional community features, I think, that bore upon directly the creation of Sherrill. The first of these community features was the fact that the community built to meet people's needs and they built to last. If you look, and this is not a picture of the Mansion House, but if you look at the Mansion House, this is not just a large, magnificent 100,000 square foot building, but it was a building that was specifically designed by the community to satisfy the needs of them as a community. So that if we look at the Big Hall was a place which took place of the religious life of the community. This is where that took place. But the Big Hall was also where they made decisions on managing their many successful economic ventures. And it was the place where they discussed how to raise and educate their children. It was the place also where you see on this raked stage, they held their own cultural events to bring them events and culture, music and the like into their lives. But they also had a library with over 4,000 books, which was part of the ways in which they developed their own selves, tried to perfect their own selves and realize their own human potential. And they had smaller but elegant meeting spaces, such as the upper sitting room, here where the children are entertaining the members of the community in a kind of dance, or where they met and ate together and reinforced their community bonds as a community 3 times a day. Or, as you see out here, the beautiful lawns and gardens providing a kind of leisure spot. What I'm trying to say here is that these people, everything they did was designed to meet these needs and to mirror and underwrite the good life, this new Eden of heaven on earth that they thought that they were creating. Or look at the trap and silk thread factory that we see here. or what becomes this barn that becomes the CAC. What we have here, in other words, are just what we saw before. These were consciously designed not just to get needed things done, but to build them always on a human scale and for generations to come. This is what they did. But the second community feature is equally important, and was its openness to the so-called outside world. This was seen in the community's openness to new scientific and technological advances, especially as those affected their many business ventures. But this openness was also seen in the forthrightness and respect with which they dealt not only with their some 300 employees, but also with all of their neighbors. This is a map of Sherrill as it begins to develop, and I'm using it as a place where I can point out some of these good relations that they had with their neighbors and their employees. It was, after all, not only the fact that they paid their employees better than average wages, very good wages, but they also built for them along here of what becomes East Hamilton Avenue, as well as other places, although I've not been able to identify exactly where, well-constructed, attractive tenements, and rented those out at very reasonable rates. And along what becomes Route 5, which is up here along Turkey Street, they made property available so that the people living along that northern area, that original area of population, would have a church that would support those people. And they also made property available in the center of what becomes Sherrill so that their employees could build a school for their children. And they built along, again, this is along Route 5, just above that, they built a tram system so that the silk girls and other employees living in the Oneida area would have cheap, easy, and affordable access to the factories that were being built on the northern side of Sherrill. But they also dealt with their neighbors in a very open, a very communal kind of way. They held strawberry festivals for all of their neighbors frequently, but they also held cultural events here. For example, 4 years after Gilbert and Sullivan's HMS Pinafore was put on the stage in London, their orchestra, their choral groups put on HMS Pinafore on the stage in the Mansion House. And according to what I understood, they then took it on the road to neighboring villages so that they could appreciate that kind of operatic culture in their midst. But even beyond that, as we see here, these people welcomed visitors from the outside to come and witness heaven on earth. I recently came across data that showed between 1863 and 1868, 48,000 people came to look at the Mansion House. These people were terrific advertisers of themselves and what heaven on earth ought to look like. But now let us turn to the post-community period, the period of OCL. Well, all of what I've just said made the community successful. It ultimately failed. In 1881, and OCL was formed in order to keep the family together and to continue operating the community's successful business ventures. But it was only modestly profitable until 1895, some 14 years after the breakup, when this man, Pierpont B. Noyes, a son of John Humphrey Noyes, and many of his age cohorts came back, and PBN took over the head of the board of directors. And with this age cohort of his, brought new vision and vigor to the business. The single most important decision that PBN and the others made was to sell the trap, silk, thread, and agricultural produce business in order to focus entirely on silverware production. And that was a very, very risky decision, given the capital-intensive nature of the silverware business, and given the well-established reputation of silverware companies such as Gorham and Reed & Barton in International Silver. But to these young Oneidas, here we see PBN with his board in 1907, and this man here is my grandfather, Theodore Skinner, another descendant of the community who is critical to the story of what Sherrill looks like, because he was an MIT graduate in architecture, and he came back and was given the role to act as the head of the planning commission precisely at the time that Sherrill was being formed. And many of the buildings, including this church here, were the effect of his designs, as was other buildings that I will show you. But the point that I'm first trying to make was that turning it over entirely to silverware, to these Oneidas like PB and the others of his generation, they simply said, no problem. And very successful they were in this phase. And they were successful because they emphasized three things. First was excellent design, which we see here in some of the earliest patterns that they brought out. The second thing that was part of their success was outstanding quality, including triple plating all of their flatware. But the third and final thing, which I think in some ways is even more important, or equally important, was advertising, outstanding advertising, which we see in the next, which we see hopefully in the next slide here. These are these beautiful, engaging ads, the so-called fadeaway girls, as evidenced by this woman in the center, where her dress simply fades away into the background. And these appeared in all the women's magazines and brought Oneida silverware to the attention, literally of the United States, if not the world. So outstanding design, outstanding quality, and extraordinary advertising brought them enormous success. But to make all of that work, and this brings us closer to Sherrill itself, the first thing they needed to do was to bring the entire silverware operation from Niagara Falls to here, to Sherrill. And the process of making that happen not only created Sherrill as the smallest city, but also stamped it with its own particular character. The key event in this process was hiring a train in 1913 to bring Niagara Falls employees here to see if they'd like to move. It was a gala affair with welcoming talks and a bountiful picnic and entertainments in what was to become Noyes Park. That we see here is the program and the 350 plus people who came from Niagara Falls to see if they liked it here. But much of the preparatory work had already been done. The factory complex itself had already been put into place and was well advanced. Here we see a building put up again to be earlier for the trap business, but converted into silverware manufacturing. And here is a whole new a factory complex built just for silverware. And so something that is far and away from the Dickensian vision of dark satanic mills. They already had a factory complex here that was light and airy and capable of producing this high-grade silverware well. The streets were also being laid out, and here we have East Hines Avenue, and small but comfortable homes for the workers were being constructed on good-sized plots. A handsome and well-appointed dormitory. This also was designed by Theodore Skinner, was designed and built by my grandfather so that single and other incoming employees could have a comfortable place to stay until they could get more permanently settled. But perhaps more importantly, or most importantly of all, this preparatory work was the fact that OCL's management had inherited the earlier community's deep belief that social environments, indeed a good society itself, could be consciously designed to meet people's needs. These people believed, in other words, that a modern secular community could be planned just as effectively as a religiously based Eden. And the fact that the society in question might rise from just 300 like-minded perfectionists to roughly 2,000 religiously and ethnically diverse people tied to the fortunes of OCL made no difference. They had a vision of what Sherrill should look like, and they appointed Theodore Skinner as chair of the Planning Commission to bring it about. Now, what did this model city look like? It was anchored in the community descendants' intuitive understanding that a good society must meet people's needs, that a community works on the ground only if it deals effectively with 5 fundamental challenges. First, a form of governance. Second, religious or some other form of binding basic beliefs. Third, an economic base to produce goods and services. Fourth, an educational system. And finally, a form of family structure. This they set out doing right from the beginning, as evidenced both by Skinner's design. This is his design of what Sherrill is to look like. This is Theodore Skinner again, and this is my mock-up of what this design, which is in Paul Noyes' office hanging right now, looks like. With Sherrill Road going here, the factories up here, a central park here with places for houses on either side, a place for what becomes the commercial center, a park here, what becomes Noyes Park, first Kenwood Park, another area for public gardens, etc. The mansion house being down here. And what is so remarkable to me is that what Theodore Skinner designed as this place is what became this place. And if we look at that very quickly, just going through, first of all, governance. Governance. OCL deliberately petitioned Albany to grant Sherrill city status, even though its population didn't merit it, in order that Sherrill would have its own elected government, independently accountable to its citizens. In other words, that it wouldn't be one of those run-of-the-mill company towns that was such a reality in other parts of the country. And the ideals that you find there, this is a seal designed by Theodore Skinner, that this was going to be a place where economy and efficiency were through cooperation. If we turn to religion, this is one of the obvious forms of bedrock belief that tends to stabilize a social order. Now, OCL approved of religion, obviously, coming from where they did, but they recognized the reality of religious diversity that was represented by Sherrill at that time. And so what they did was to make land available so that every church, Catholic and the variety of Protestant denominations, would each have their own property on which to build their own churches. And one of those was this Plymouth church here, also designed by Theodore Skinner. Economics. The core of economics in Sherrill was obviously OCL and the production of silverware. But OCL recognized 2 sub-imperatives. The first was that a more comfortable and aesthetically pleasing community would exist only when the messy factory areas were kept at the periphery, and the places where people lived and prayed, learned, and recreated were located within walking distance of each other, but in a green space dominated center. In other words, the factories would be at the north and the south of Sherrill, and everything else would be in green space, if you will, for churches and schools and homes in the middle. And secondly, they recognized that people needed local businesses to take care of their everyday needs, hence the Skinner block of 7 enterprises, ranging from a bank and food market to a dry goods store and pharmacy, all of which, most importantly, were owned and run by people totally separate from, independent of OCL. Moving to education, people can only realize their talents and interests when they have access to education. Additionally, of course, OCL believed that well-educated people made good employees and good citizens. The result was that OCL not only provided the land, but also 1/2 of the construction costs of advanced level primary, middle, and high schools. And they also provided a teacher wage subsidy that allowed the Board of Education to hire the very best teachers, including single women graduates from Wellesley and other Seven Sister colleges. But and so here's the high school, here's Kenwood Park School, and here are Theodore Skinner's design for Willow Place School, the primary school in the north part of Sherrill. But the OCL recognized that education was more than just book learning. It was also culture and recreational activities. And so it's for that reason that they gave land and supported the structure of a library. It's for that reason that they created Kenwood Park with its baseball diamond and all the rest of the area for recreation. Finally, family. The family is the cornerstone of every community, and OCL believed that they were creating a tightly knit corporate family that was held together by the idea of productive excellence, what they called OCQ, or United Community Quality, but also more self-interestedly by higher than average wages, by excellent health program, pension program, profit sharing program, and a much narrower gap between management and worker incomes. But they also believed that sound, comfortably situated families were a social good in themselves. Therefore, they made it possible for their workers to buy land from them and to be subsidized in terms of mortgage payments by OCL on property here along Kinsley Street. And this is a home that Grandpa Skinner designed on Primo Ave that was, again, a worker's home because the community believed that strong homes made not only strong citizens, but a strong company. And they made these 70 by 160 foot plots available. Now, my conclusions are 3. First, my first conclusion is, I think there's no question but that the United Community and its successive generations of members through the OCL period dominated not only the very act of creating Sherrill, but also the way it was put together, the architecture of its public and private spaces, the character of what came to be its daily rhythms. That's my first conclusion. My second conclusion comes as a kind of caveat to that. In other words, I think we must recognize that this entire city planning process was paternalistic in the sense that it was generated by the community's basic belief system and by its members, be they older or younger. There was always a deep respect, I believe, and a fundamental generosity that characterized the community and OCL's relations with all of its workers and its neighbors. But it was still, as a creative process, a top-down process, as evidenced by the fact that the top management remained overwhelmingly in the hands of community descendants, at least until World War II and beyond. Yet my third and final conclusion acts as a kind of counterpose to my second point. Namely, that is, the fact that this was a model that worked. I think it is possible to plan and build community and an architecture that integrates public and private spaces in such a way that they meet people's basic needs in a humane and aesthetically pleasing manner, I think is clearly the right tack to take when you're trying to build the bonds of community. Sherrill continues to be a model city, I think, for very good reasons. And equally clearly, OCL, I think, built a corporate model that emphasized both its family responsibilities from top to bottom and its commitment to a specific place. That too is something I think we can learn from, especially in a world whose business model increasingly seems to emphasize short-term profits, global outsourcing, and golden parachutes. I think that Sherrill has much, much to be proud of. Thank you.
Change speakers. Just give us a minute to change. So if you want to stand up and stretch a minute, don't leave.
I'm not quite as polished as far as Giles is concerned, and I have to move from one slide to another by waving my finger. I want to acknowledge the people who have given me some help. First, of course, on the left is Craig Kroll. He was a funeral director here for many years, and he's now living outside Rochester. And he steered me to a map of Sherrill, which I also found useful. Tony Wonderly is in the center up there. Tony is a genuine card-carrying historian. And as Giles has pointed out, the interrelationship between Sherrill and the United Community is very close, very close. Certainly for 100 years, from say 1880 to 1980, and therefore he knows that whole period. And then of course Gary Onion, who's sitting right here, he has probably walked every foot of every street more than once probably. And I expect he's almost done the same thing with our parks too. And Gary is going to be helping me. Jack Stone is here. He knows. He remembers a little bit about 1918, and he said he was quite young at the time. Okay. My talk will be divided into three parts. First, what I call the development of the streets here during the past 100 years. Obviously, the streets didn't all just hatch all at once. Then, of course, the main part of it is the street names, okay? Because we have streets that are named after human beings. And then some conclusions I've made about the streets in general. Okay, this is a Google aerial map of Sherrill today. And you can see here's Route 5 running through here. Here's the factory complex. Here's Sherrill Road coming down here. Here's Oneida Creek, which divides Oneida County from Madison County. This is Hamilton Avenue coming in to Sherrill. And to the east, of course, is Vernon and Utica. To the west, Oneida and Syracuse. Okay. This is a pure city map diagram as Sherrill is today. Just the streets. And again, the same thing again. This is Oneida Creek, that's Betzinger Road, that's Route 5 coming across there, that's the factory complex there, and Hamilton Avenue coming in here. This drawing is what Craig Kroll gave a lot of interest to. This is and Giles also had the same drawing, and these are the city limits of Sherrill in 1919. And you can see the limits. Right here is Hamilton Avenue. Excuse me, Kinsley Street. And Kinsley Street is just planned. It's just planned. And obviously there's nothing, it's just farmland here to the west. And here that's the city limit right there, which is 2 or 3 blocks just east of Sherrill Road. And this way out here, that's Betzinger Road. And so there's just farmland here. Okay. This, I think, Tony, the other map, this is the enlargement, there we go. This is that map enlarged, and it shows the actual buildings at the time. And this is, of course, 100 years ago. I've lost my machine. What do I do? There, I guess I'm back in business. Now, it's interesting to note this was the plan 100 years ago. And first I'd like to know what did not happen. Okay? Now that's right there. It's the intersection of what's known as then it was Noyes Avenue. It became Noyes Boulevard. But right there, of course, is the old City Hall. And there was to be a Newhouse Avenue. And Giles talked about Newhouse because he was the trap man. And there was to be a street named for him. That street never happened. There was to be a grand street, at least I call it, and that's called Boulevard. It's called, see the Boulevard here? Now that's Park Street right there. But this from here to here never happened. There was to be right here a road which is called Spring Street. That never happened. And Tony, can we go up a little higher? No, not there. We want to use it. There we go. Good. Here, that's Primo Avenue right there. The idea was that Primo Avenue would extend across, and there would be a West Primo Ave, just like there's a West Hamilton Avenue. West, and but my understanding is that a man knew about that idea of extending across, and therefore he bought up the land, and I limited didn't own it, and figured they'd have to buy it from him. That didn't happen, so Primal Avenue is just here. So there's the boulevard that never happened, and I gather that what was called Noise Avenue, they said, well, we got the word boulevard kicking around, so we'll make that Noise Boulevard. Spring Street I talked about, Newhouse Avenue, and then up, can we go the higher one, Tony? Yeah, there you go. That's quite interesting. Here, of course, we go, there's the underpass, that's Seneca Street here, that's Willow Place. Willow Place goes up here and just stops, at dead ends. But the intention was to have a nice circular drive, Sconadone Circle, I guess. And I think that would have been quite elegant homes there, but that never happened also. Now I like to turn to what did happen. And stay where we were, Tony. There we go. You can see this is Mud Creek coming through Sherrill, okay? And Mud Creek in the springtime can get pretty angry, okay? And you can see it knucking around here. And it isn't that way today. It doesn't have all those bobs and weaves to it. But I think that it was low and wet, and they just somebody couldn't get across. And this is Kinsley Street right here, and you can see it just stops. They couldn't get across. And the idea is, I understand, Kinsley Street was going to circle around, come down on the parallel street. And that was, so what happened was, as you know, as you come out of City Hall today, and there's a hill right there that it goes down to Route 5. My father called that was called Christian Hill. And the Christian Hill was much steeper. They cut it down. And then more modern equipment arrived that you could use bulldozers and what have you. So ultimately this is filled in. So you come up here and you can go all the way up. And then of course, the expansion took place east here out to Betzinger Road and even on the other side, and west in that direction also. So Tony, let's go back to that, the whole map. No, not that one. The 1919 map. There we go. There's the 1919 map, and we've talked about how narrow it was. I think people came here to live, I think for three reasons. They came here because it was a place to work, okay? It was a place to work, because otherwise around here was lots and lots of family farms. There aren't that many places to go to work and come home. And once they decided to come here, they had to have a place where they could walk to work. And they had to have a place where their children could walk to school. And this map shows how that was happening. You had the north side here, there was school right in here. Ultimately, there was the Willow Play School there. And then here is Primal Avenue and some homes here, and these people could walk to the factory. Then you had a cluster of homes here on Hamilton Avenue and Campbell Avenue. And these people obviously had a longer walk to go there, and they could also go to the factory on the south, which Giles talked about, where their silk threads was made. And you'll see here See that little line right there? That little line? I think that line is a walking path. Because I can remember you could walk, there was a place you could get over the creek right here, just a pedestrian bridge. And you could walk, so these people could they could walk to the silk factory or whatever else was going on there. And also, children here could walk here, because there was right here was a school, and that is School Street. So you walk to work and you walk to school. Linda will be talking more about the school opportunities that existed here in Sherrill, and that's also very interesting, I think. Okay, now let's go to the next one, Tony. There we go. You remember Giles talked about the plated ware that United Community decided to bring to Sherrill. And he showed that photograph of inviting them to come here and what have you. This is a photograph of the factory itself. And that was owned by the United Community. And they were plating tableware there. Plating tableware there. And as Giles points out, they made the radical decision they weren't making enough money in traps, they weren't making enough money in the silk thread business. So they sold that off, and let's go with knives, forks, and spoons. And so these people knew how to do it, and they were all invited to come here and hopefully go into the plating business. Okay, Tony, there. That photograph there is a group of the Niagara Falls men. They all came here as young men. They all came here as young men. Some of them, I suppose, have wives, or they formed families. And that was the Niagara Club. That was the Niagara Club. And all those people, obviously, when they came right here, they're in their 60s, I think, and they probably came here in their 20s. And Jack Stone can recognize some of those people. And he's not in that photograph. But, and then, yeah, he took, and then those people are okay, next one. That right there, obviously if they're going to come here, they had a place to live, had to have a place to live. In that building right there were little tiny rooms where just almost nothing more than a cot or a bed. There was a common dining room here, and some of them lived right there. Obviously, they walked out the door, they go right into the factory right there. Okay, Tony. That, of course, is a photograph of the dormitory built. The dorm was right across from where there's now a vacant lot there now. You know, they had a lot of work moving the power line there. That's where the dorm was. And, no, wait a minute. Okay. The dorm, after the men moved out of there, that dorm was used for quite a long time. Right here, the factory store was located. A real, genuine factory store. And the Sherrill City offices were right here. That's where Pete Nolan worked, right there. The Sherrill City office right there. The rest of the building was used by the design department. Frank Warren, some of you know Frank Warren. Frank Warren and his people were there. Okay. Okay, that shows you're going to have a talk about the railroads, and this gives an idea about it. And this is the underpass right here at Sherrill Road, Route 5. That's the West Shore electric car up there. There was a stop right there. And this right here is the trolley that ended right here and went south through Sherrill, through Kenwood, and ended up at the knife plant. I was sort of interested to see this. See this stairway going up here, right here? That's how you got up there. The whole concept of handicap accessible didn't exist. If you you couldn't make it up those stairs, you just didn't get up there. Okay. Now, here's a photograph of the Sherrill factory people, and they're in the business of making traps and chains. And this is an example of where you walk to work. And you can see all the men here, they all had hats on. Up here, there's some women. They're up here. Okay, Tony. Now we're going south, that's the mansion house. And we go a little further, Tony. Yeah, there we go. These are employees at the silk factory. And it's striking to me that, of course, now the women are right here in front. These are all women right here. And right there, let's see, I have her name down here. That, I believe, is Mrs. Whitman. The United Community and women were recognized as being capable, handling money, being in charge of the whole thing. She was in charge, I believe that's her first lieutenant right there. And she's in charge of the whole factory complex there. Okay. Okay, now we come to the streets. Okay, and okay, I don't know how I'm going to do this, yeah. Okay. I wish I had a second screen over here. But I don't have a second screen over here. Okay, obviously, Albert Kinsley, there we go. If we can go back and forth, I don't know if we can. But here we go. Kinsley Street, I think you know. Okay, right there. And Albert Kinsley was a very popular factory superintendent. Next one. Okay, that's Grover Allen Street. He was in charge of design, and Giles talked about how important this whole subject of design was. Design was what occurs at the end of the spoon handle, or the knife handle. That's what sold the product. Next one. All right, that's Lou Wayland Smith, as in Wayland Street. He was in charge of money. He was in charge of money. And there's Wayland Street right there. Now we got a good system. Okay, the next one. Okay, that's Jerry Wayland Smith. And I believe that Wayland Street was named in his honor, and Jerry Wayland Smith's honor. He was very much involved with Sherrill. He was very much involved. He was on all the boards. He was able to persuade to get money to come for projects and what have you. The United City Hospital would not have existed if it wasn't for Jerry Wayland Smith. He was a very good person, very good person. Next, that's Stephen Leonard, Stephen R. Leonard, Leonard Street. He was a trained engineer, graduated from Cornell, and he is the person, when you turn on your faucet at home and you have soft water, he's the person who's responsible for that. He was a hunter, a game hunter, and he had dogs. And he was hunting in town of Florence, north of Oneida, and he up there where now is the Glenmore Reservoir. In the Glenmore Reservoir, he recognized that would be a source of soft water. And he was instrumental in making that whole thing happen. It was piped to Oneida, piped to Sherrill. The basic reason was that silver plating required ample soft water. And they really, Shenandoah Creek wasn't good enough for it. And therefore, and now today, as I say, that soft water is in Vernon, it's in Munnsville, Oneida, and Sherrill. And Stephen Leonard is really the person who realized that there would be a source of water. Stephen Leonard, hired by father, 1935. The next one, that's Dunk Robertson. Robertson Park, Robertson Street. He was a tough businessman. And he liked to win. And he knew how to cheat in golf. And he knew how to cheat in cards, too. He was a tough businessman. Okay, Tony. Okay, there, Giles shows that, a later photograph of it. That barn, the barn right there, is a CAC barn. That was a huge cow barn, and it shows here, to the left of that, they're constructing that addition on there, where now there used to be pool tables, meeting rooms upstairs, and later on, the bowling alleys were built here. But that, and then to the right of that, right there, see those houses? That, of course, is East Hamilton Avenue, but then it was called Barn Street, because of the barn. And West Hamilton, I think it was called, it really didn't exist, Adams Street or something like that. Okay, the next one, that is Erastus Hamilton, and Hamilton Avenue is named in his honor. He was the first president of United Community Limited. Next one. Now we go to Campbell. Campbell was a silk thread salesman. He became president of United Limited in 1884, 1888, and I assume that he was a pleasant, good salesman. Okay, the next one. That is Mr. Ransom Avenue. I don't know what Ransom Avenue's first name is. I don't know anything about him. But I do have his photograph. Huh? Jack, you remember Jack? No, I don't think so. Okay, well, that's if I've screwed it up, I've screwed it up. Okay, who's next? That's Billy Lifehaver. I don't know anything about Billy Life, but nevertheless, there he is. Next one, that's P.B. Noyes, of course. And he was critical in making this whole place go, making money. He was a leader. He knew how to gather around him people who were capable, and he was critical, no question about it. Next one. Now, my understanding is that is Sewell Newhouse. It isn't? And he was a jump pad guy. Okay, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But he never got her street. Okay. I use that one because that's Mrs. Primo, and Mrs. Primo apparently was a person to be dealt with. She was tough, and you didn't cross her, as I understand it. There's two sides of something. You hope she's on your side. Actually, I believe her father-in-law was the person who was instrumental in naming of Primo. Now we make a change. Now we change. We go from United Limited management people to Sherrill people, okay? And that is Mr. Ross, Bill Ross. He was a druggist here for a long time, and he was mayor. And I believe this photograph is taken when he's honoring a city employee who was retired. But we go to Ross, and then we have Ross Terrace. Next, that's Pete Noto. I took that photograph. That's Pete Noto. Pete Noto had his office in the dormitory. And then when they built the city hall, that's at the end of Noyes Boulevard, that he moved there. And he was very instrumental in Sherrill. And I believe he was on this county legislature also. Next, that's Alex Park. I don't know whether Park Place is named for him or his father. I don't know, but he was popular. He was a good speaker. Another thing that's changed, going from Night Limited to these local people, now the roads become quite elegant names. Instead of street or avenue, now we have terrace and drive, you know, and place. You know, we're really getting right up to date. And then there's Marion Thurston Terrace. And she was very popular. She was a very popular, good woman, and she was mayor. She was mayor 50 years ago. Next I'm using Red Jacket. He was a Seneca Indian, and I'm only using him to illustrate because we have Seneca Street, which runs east to west all the way across the state of New York. And Seneca Street here is sort of patchy, and part of it is what we have is Route 5. Okay. Next, there. And I don't think any of you are going to recognize that. I don't either. But nevertheless, that is the church on Church Street. Church Street. You have the street map, Tony? You know, that's... Huh? Okay, there it is. Yeah, that's there. I mean, Chapel Street, excuse me. Chapel Street, right at the corner is that building. Right at the corner. And Mrs. McDermott lives there. Mrs. McDermott has good memory. She's 90 years old. She came here when she was, I think she told me, when she was 6 months old. Okay? And she lived in a house right next to where the Episcopal Church is. And she said the building behind that was used as school. When she and her husband moved in here, the church pews were still there. And the bell in that church supposedly came here and became the bell in this church. I don't know that's the fact, but that's what the deal was. And now we come to a very interesting one in my mind. Yeah, that is the dedication service of the Union Free Church, Turkey Street. Okay, Turkey Street was the name before Seneca Street. Was Turkey Street. Why it's called Turkey Street, I've read various explanations, but nevertheless. So it's Turkey Street, Vernon, New York. See, right now there's no animal called Sherrill. Okay, and they have it's the Union Free Church because there's two groups. First they met at 2 o'clock on Friday. That's just one group, and then at 7:30 another group met. They each had their own minister, and then they had a new minister down at the bottom. And part of the reason I'm using that is one of the trustees, is Daniel A. Betzinger, okay? And that's the closest I come to the origin of the word Betzinger, okay? Now, I don't know whether he owned land up there or whether he was a descendant of somebody named Betzinger, but that's the closest I come to Betzinger. Okay, what do we got next? Okay. That's a foundry. That's a foundry. That's a foundry that existed. Right now you have Elmwood Place, okay? Elmwood Place. Can we go back to the street map, Tony? Okay, yeah, well, there we go. See Elmwood Place right there? And it goes across this Conrador Creek and ends up at the top there, Cedar Street. And when you go over to where the city buildings are, there, right there, you go across a bridge, and there's a dam there, and that dam powered that foundry. So Foundry Street, that was torn down when Night Limited used that, and I'm just guessing, but maybe that the foundry created the steelwork for the tracks. I don't know that. I was putting together. That was torn down, but the dam is still there. So Elmwood, and then let's go back to the street, Tony. To this, yeah, right there. Now, when you go across the street, go across Shenandoah Creek, that doesn't show the creek. It doesn't show the creek, but nevertheless, that area over there was known as, Jack will tell us, Little Canada, okay? So that whole influence of the people who came, they call it down from Canada. And they took that chance, as Giles said, to go into the plated-ware business. Okay, what we got next, Tony? There. Now, you remember School Street. School Street delves into East Hamilton Avenue, and that's a group of school children there. See where School Street comes? Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's school right there at Hamilton Avenue. That's where that school is, right there. And they call that the Union School, Kenwood, New York. That's before there was a Sherrill. And that looks like, to me, there's some fairly small children. It looks like maybe some high school seniors. I believe it was a 3-room schoolhouse. But you'll learn more about that when we hear about the schools. Okay, what's next? There we go. That's that building today. This is Hamilton, East Hamilton Avenue here. School Street comes in here. Dr. Prouder, Theodore Prouder had his first office there. Theodore Prouder had his first office in that building. And then that path I showed you, where you can go down across the lot and go across the bridge, that path goes down just to the right of this building. Okay, Murphy Street, that's Fred Murphy. I believe he was very popular, and he wasn't the first policeman in Sherrill, but first policeman, I guess, was not popular. If you get the message. Okay. But Fred Murphy apparently was a very decent person, and he was more than just the police chief. I believe he apparently could sing. I believe he was in the church, and he was the lead singer there. Okay, what do we got next? Okay, now we go to additional streets I don't have people for, okay? Now, Pageant, now we got to jump back and forth here a little bit. Pageant was a builder, okay? And I think I told you about that Pageant, see, where he thought he was going to make money off Sherrill, didn't. So he had to build his own, he made a shorter street there. Okay, that's William Pageant. I don't know anything about Marshall. Now, Cherry Lane, of course, is up the hill, and they came in from New Hartford and Utica, an outfit called Cherry Construction or whatever it was. Yeah, right here, yeah. Okay, who we got next year? Fairway Lane, of course, that's the golf course. That's the road that goes down to the sewage treatment plant. And I've always wondered, if Fairway Lane was there, and the houses were built on Fairway Lane, and then Sherrill decided to put the treatment plant at the end of the road, can you imagine how the people would feel about that? But no problem. See, the treatment plant came first, and then the houses came. Okay. Roland Place, Oh, excuse me, we're on Fairway Lane. Okay, now comes Prospect Street. Prospect Street, apparently, there we go, right there. That was bad news. That was called Mud Road, I think, or Mud Street. And I think it was one of the last ones that get paved. These guys, of course, who lived there, you could go right out and go to the factory, walk to the factory. And it was also called Foot Street. And I assume maybe it was because it was the foot of Christian Hill, but apparently somebody named Foot lived there. Rowland Place is the end. There was a George Rowland. Willow Place is sort of interesting. When you read about Willow Place, they always associate it with the building where the American Legion is today. That building was the first CAC clubhouse, in effect. Also, I believe it was the first library was there. And the name Willow Place, you can see there was no back. That's my kicker. Willow Place was the name of a street in Brooklyn, New York, okay? And there, United Community had a printing plant, And so I guess they decided, what the hell, why don't we call this Willow Place? And now Cedar Street, that is on the other side of the bridge there, and that up there, of course, is Little Canada. Okay, what do we got next? Oh, Stone Street. Craig Kroll says there was a stone quarry in the area. I don't know about that, because I read fairly recently that there was a man who came to town, and built one of the major houses on East Seneca Avenue. There's some couple quite large homes there, and his name was Captain Stone. I don't know where the captain comes from, but nevertheless, it sounds like he was a person of means. Apparently, he brought the lumber here supposedly from Albany to build the house. But there was a Captain Stone, and I'm guessing, is there any? That's your street.
They don't name that. No, I know that.
But is there any quarry up there?
I believe there was some quarry down there below the waterfalls.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
Well.
what I'm talking about that.
Okay. Well, that's why do I have to have Jack to be the source of that? Yeah. Okay. What do we got next? Stone Pexton. There was a builder from Vernon named Lorenzo Pexton, and he built houses up there. And you better point out where Pexton Street is. You go back to there we go. Let's go up to Pexton. Yeah, I don't think it's labeled as such. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Pexton goes that way. And Cottage Place, he also built, and according to Craig Kroll, they said, okay, what do you want to call it? And he called it Pexton Street. Cottage Place. And that was the builder there. And then I have a couple of others. There's William Street. I couldn't find anything in William Street, and then I stumbled on the fact there was a Williams sawmill up there. There's a Williams sawmill, so I'm assuming that maybe that's the Williams that William Street came from. As you go out of Sherrill, you go to VVS on Beacon Light Road, and some of you may remember there was a beacon light out at the intersection there at VVS. Okay, have we got any more here? Okay, Parker, I have no idea about. High Bridge Road, that is part of Sherrill, and there's a high bridge that went over the third rail there. It went over the third rail, and that was all filled in. And I don't think that Linda knows that her father Harry Rosbrook was on the town board, and he told me one time that was his project. That was his project, meaning the town board of Vernon said, Harry, you take care of that. Anyhow, it was filled in, and the bridge is gone. And also, there's Sconnedoa Street, that's where that circle was. It never existed, never completed. And finally, of course, what about Sherrill Road? Well, most of you have some idea about that. It's all laid out there in City Hall. It was named after somebody's son. Why don't you use my son's name, Sherrill Sherman, I guess. So it's not very a romantic start, but now we have Sherrill. Okay. Last night, a week ago on Sunday, I came to Sherrill. A week ago on Sunday, I came to Sherrill. And as you may remember, Saturday night, we had a snowstorm, 4 or 5 inches here in this area. And I came in on Middle Road. Now, Middle Road is a fairly well-traveled road. And Madison County has a good highway department. And Middle Road was not touched at 11 o'clock in the morning. It was sort of rough, but you could get through. I got to Sherrill, and suddenly, the roads were plowed. The salt fluid was down. It was right down to the bare. And also, the sidewalks were plowed. The sidewalks were plowed. Now, that's Sunday morning, okay? Very easily, you could take the attitude of, look, this is Sunday, and we'll get at it on Monday. That was startling to me. And I'm sure if you went to Utica, to Vernon, to Oneida, to Syracuse, and made the same observation at the same time, you wouldn't find the sidewalks plowed and the streets plowed. You wouldn't find it. So that's something that I think we take it for granted. But we shouldn't take it for granted. Okay, now let's go to the next one. These are some summaries. In Sherrill, all streets are paved, all have curbs, okay? Almost all have curbs. Don't take curbs for granted. Here you got curbs. They all have storm sewers. They all have street lighting. Don't take that for granted. Almost all of them have sidewalks. There's a few where the people don't want sidewalks, but almost all of them have sidewalks. And I use as contrast in Kenwood, which one time was quite an exclusive neighborhood. They don't have curbs, they don't have storm sewers, most of them don't have lighting, and only a little bit of sidewalks. Okay? And that made me think about Flint, Michigan, which is in the news, okay? And it's more than just Flint, Michigan, as far as school children are concerned, and lead in the pipes. I asked, and I found out that in Sherrill, which is underneath our streets, none of the mains are lead. None of the mains are lead, and there may be some lead from the edge of the street, to the houses. Probably some of the older houses may have some lead. Now, what's next? Yeah. Now we're going back to today in Sherrill. And we've talked about how the streets were developed, the people's names behind the streets. Now, almost no one walks to work, right? Almost no children walk to school. Now Sherrill, nevertheless, is a wonderful place to live, a wonderful place to live. And this is partly due to an excellent road system, an excellent